Hello, it's Lord Slar here, and it's been a long time since I've done a full season review. It seems to be the type of video that gets the most requests, so I think it's only right that we finally round out the 60 seasons, 5 years since I reviewed the 5th. Season 6 was almost akin to Season 3 in how turbulent a production it went through, except rather than the issue being a revolving door of producers and script editors, even if there was a change in hands during the season, there was instead an inability to get scripts completed. Other than Colin Baker's unused scripts for Season 23, Season 6 has by far the most Big Finish lost stories, that is, finished or semi-completed scripts being turned into full cast audios, which just goes to show the huge amount of ideas the production team went through. However, the stability and chemistry of the main cast definitely helps this season come together, and if Doctor Who shows anything, it's that necessity is the mother of ingenuity, and there's some bloody great stories here, some even ranking among the all-time best. So sit back, relax, and let me take you through my view on the 6th season of Doctor Who broadcast in 1968/1969. The Dominators. Inauspiciously starting the season is the much-loved Dominators. On polls surveyed, this story very often comes out on the bottom of the list of Troughton stories. Contributing towards this was its very troubled creation. Producer Peter Bryant and script editor Derek Sherwin made a number of changes to the script of Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln, of Yeti fame, including a shortening of the story of 5 episodes. Haseman and Lincoln were upset at the changes made to the story, so asked for their name to be removed from the credits, leading to the non-existent Norman Ashby being credited in the title sequence. The plot is that the Doctor and co land on a deserted nuclear test island on the planet Dulcus, which is suspiciously lacking in radioactivity. The reason for this is that a Dominator ship with 2 crew and a small force of deadly quark robots have crash-landed and absorbed the radiation to power their ship. The TARDIS team must protect the native Dulcians, who are peaceful to a fault, as the Dominators are willing to go to any lengths to rejoin their fleet, including slave labour and the destruction of the entire planet. So does the Dominators deserve its reputation? Yes and no. Yes, it does on the one hand, as it's definitely one of the weaker Troughtons. It has a pretty poorly paced, simplistic plot that plods on and on for 5 episodes. The story offers very little to maintain anyone's interests, as the characters just kind of mill about, with moments of significance being rare, and there's almost no interesting twists or subversions. On the other hand, stop all being mean old farts. The Dominators is bloody great fun, and I won't have anybody say otherwise. Why, you ask? Well, first of all, the main cast are on fire. The Doctor and Jamie are very well established at this point, and their antics, as well as the lovely performances from Troughton and Hines, carry the story. I absolutely adore the moments where the Doctor has to pretend to be a complete moron in order to convince the Dominators to leave him alone, a pretense he has to maintain for the whole story. Thinking about it, the Dominators themselves never actually realise they were fooled, as they only have seconds of knowing their plan has been foiled when they see the nuclear bomb meant for the planet on their ship, mere moments before it destroys them. This is Zoe's first trip in the TARDIS since being introduced in the Wheel in Space. Zoe makes a fine addition to the team, making a great foil for the Doctor in terms of intelligence, as she can almost rival him, and both have a bit of a competitive streak with each other. The main point of development left open to Zoe at the end of the Wheel in Space is that she wants to feel more and experience more, rather than being a callous human computer. It was a very interesting idea for a companion from David Whittaker, and while we do see the giddiness of Zoe finally being freed from a strict and structured lifestyle on the Wheel, the idea goes unexplored in the story. The Dominators and Quarks are a highlight too. While the actual plot itself really struggled to go anywhere, the conflict between the 2 Dominator characters was actually quite an interesting one. The commander of the ship, Rago, is cold, calculating and efficient. He has absolutely no qualms about using violence to its greatest extremities, but only when it serves him to get closer to achieving his objectives. Tober, on the other hand, likes destruction for its own sake, and will take any opportunity to enact cruelty and violence, even when it was disadvantageous to his objectives. Over the course of the story, tension grows as Rago tries to rein in Tober, until eventually having to intimidate Tober with the threat of death by Quark to make him fall into line. This links to the main theme of the story, which is pacifism. I liked how the characters of Rago and Tober explored the different kinds of destructive evil that people have to face. These forces are the fly in the ointment of a perfectly peaceful society, one so peaceful they cannot resist enslavement by evil. It's a basic message that in order to preserve a peaceful society you need the capacity and appetite to fight back against an aggressor, but it works despite being a little mean-spirited at times with the betrayal of the pacifist Dulcians. The side characters in this story, aside from the Dominators themselves, are barely worth talking about. Cully was somewhat fun to have around as the rebellious action man of this world totally opposed to action, but the rest of the side characters were dull, almost by design given the name of the planet clearly derives from that word. It's a shame as a good guest cast is often enough to transform a below-par Classic Who script, but sadly not here. Maurice Barry performs his third and final directorship with this story, and sadly, it's probably his weakest. I wouldn't say it was poorly directed, however. It would just have a lot to live up to compared to the Moonbase and Tomb of the Cybermen. There are some good shots here and there, as well as a couple of unnecessarily excellent explosions, but ultimately there just wasn't much to work with on this story, and it shows. I completely understand why most people hate this story. It's 5 episodes largely spent scrambling round an island not doing a whole lot, with only a brief mid-story foray into Dulcian society. Seeing more of that, and exploring the themes regarding pacifism a bit more, could have made a more interesting story. But I think a combination of the very fun main cast and the entertaining villains carry this one for me. It's certainly not a good Doctor Who story, I'd never claim that, but I love it anyway. The Mind Robber. The Mind Robber is often lauded as one of the most creative and unique Doctor Who stories, and for good reason. Like many of Doctor Who's best, it came from a place of constraint and necessity. As the Dominators were shortened to 5 episodes, there was a 1-episode gap which the 4-part Mind Robber had to fill. Derek Sherwin, the script editor, decided to pen the episode himself as a prologue of sorts to the story. As the episode is set outside the laws of the known universe, there was quite a concept to work with. With almost no budget, the episode is set entirely in the TARDIS and a fully white set, with our 3 main casts being the only characters to speak of. The plot is arguably Doctor Who's first real dalliance with abstract horror. Outside the TARDIS, there should be nothing, yet strange happenings and unusual behaviour demonstrate that out here, they're not alone. Right from the very beginning, the audience is put on their toes by Troughton's anxiety of what may lie beyond the universe. This sets the tone of fear of the unknown and dread of what may be out there. This slowly builds dread throughout the story, as the events slowly spiral out of control as the TARDIS team slowly lose control to this new world, ultimately ending with the breaking apart of the TARDIS itself, with Jamie and Zoe descending on the console into mist, leading into the unknown. It's a special cliffhanger for a really special episode. It must rank among the most atmospheric bits of TV ever, as it enthralled me from the start to finish every time. You daren't take your eyes off the screen. Of course, it does have flaws, the biggest of which being that it's never explained how the first part of the story relates to the rest of it, or why the entity was so keen to lure the TARDIS team outside, but it fits within the parameters of what we learn about the world later on in the story, and the motives of the elusive master. No, not that one. So I'm not too concerned. The rest of the story doesn't quite live up to the first episode, like many a Classic Who serial if we're honest, but it's still fantastic. The TARDIS crew have arrived in the land of fiction, where storybook characters and toys are alive, and solving riddles can be a life or death situation. I don't think there's too much I can say that hasn't already been said a lot of times about this story in terms of just how relentlessly inventive it is. My favourite aspect is the scene where the Doctor and the Master, no not that one, conjure up a series of more and more powerful and more public domain fictional characters to fight. I wish they'd delved a bit more into this aspect of the story. Fighting for control of fiction is quite a nice, if half-baked in this case, avenue to metatextually examine fiction, how it is created and who gets to control it, whether it's the author, the reader, or the fiction itself. After all, the tricks of the author here only work on the Doctor and Zoe when they believe it to be true. One major criticism I'd have in terms of the plot is the ultimate plan of the villains. I think I would have been quite happy enough if the whole plot was just the world trying to find a replacement for its current author and controller, as he's getting on a bit. But no, instead it has to be that the purpose of the land of fiction is to take over the earth and enslave mankind. How boring for an otherwise very creative story. There is more than enough threat in being the creative slave in a world where you must continuously create and control fiction. In this different universe of strange rules, the land of fiction didn't really need a purpose to be like this, just as the laws of physics don't have a defined purpose in our universe. This point, I think, is a lesson in not needing to explain everything when it comes to high-concept sci-fi. You reduce the mysterious fantastical into the mundane everyday. The creative plot, along with the stellar main cast performances, a good if small selection of side characters and quality direction which pulls off a variety of ambitious effects, leads to mesmerising Doctor Who. I've loved it since I first watched it when I was 8, and it has a breathtaking magic that is just amazing to experience at that age. The story is a must-watch for all Doctor Who fans. How lucky we are to have a complete copy of it, given how much of the rest of this era is missing. The Invasion. The Invasion is quite a juxtaposition to the previous story, as we go from sci-fi that's so high concept it's almost fantasy, to a gritty espionage story set in the modern day. Given the nature of serialised telly, that's the nature of the beast. It certainly helps that this one is an absolute corker. It is also very much an important piece of Doctor Who. I don't know how conscious it was, but this story very much trials the Earthbound format of the Pertwee era, with Unit's first involvement, a contemporary human villain, as well as a classic alien invasion of Earth. The Invasion, in its first half, very much takes on the guise of a gritty thriller involving spying and industrial espionage. Almost like an episode of Doomwatch, a show that was 2 years off airing at this point. The Doctor and Jamie must investigate the powerful International Electromatics Company after numerous disappearances have taken place there, including Zoe and a new friend Isabel, as they search for the missing Professor Travers to help them repair some TARDIS circuits. The story does a great job of building up the mystery of what's going on at International Electromatics. Before we even know anything about them, our introduction is right at the beginning of the story, where the crew, with an enigmatic man, have to avoid company guards and be smuggled through checkpoints in order to escape their territory. It's great storytelling, as it instantly intrigues the audience and puts them on guard for this company when it comes up again later in the episode. We then meet the charming Tobias Vaughan and his British head of security, Packer. They're such a fantastic duo who steal the show every time they're on screen. Vaughan straight away demonstrates his charismatic form of manipulation, as he easily throws Jamie off the scent despite his rough handling at the hands of Packer. Packer is such an excellent foil for Vaughan, as while he is the velvet glove, Packer is the iron gauntlet, a technique which you can see Vaughan uses to make people want to stay on his good side. Packer is such an excellent love-to-hate brute with the sadism of a proper henchman to boot. Vaughan, on the other hand, despite everything he does, can never fail to win you over with his silver tongue. Over the course of the Doctor and Jamie's attempts to find Zoe, slowly more is revealed about the nature of International Electromatics. We discover that Vaughan is communicating with a strange, otherworldly voice, planning all the time. Later we see he's also smuggling something quite alive on his company's freight trains. This all goes to heighten the sense of threat and intrigue throughout, making for a gripping first 4 parts. At the Part 4 cliffhanger, Vaughan's mysterious allies are revealed to be the Cybermen. With another 4 parts to go, it becomes a bit more of an action story, which, while fun to watch, isn't quite as compelling. We get some pretty awesome and brilliantly shot fights between Unit and the Cybermen, and some really tense moments and close calls where Cybermen ships and bombs have to be knocked down by an anti-missile missile base. But aside from that, these episodes do drag a bit more, and are definitely missing the spark that made the first 4 episodes special. They're still a good watch though. Along with Vaughan and Packer, we're treated to an array of great side characters. Firstly, we have the return of Colonel Lethbridge Stewart, now the Brigadier. He's a serious and practical man who is thoughtful and clever when going about his investigations and jumping through all the legal hoops to ensnare Vaughan. I much prefer this early portrayal to the much more stubborn and bumbling military man from the later Pertwee era. Another standout here is Isabel, who almost functions as a third companion in this story. She's a fun and willful character who acts as a great foil for Zoe and Jamie, leading to quite a rebellious dynamic we don't always see among the companions. The directing in this story is simply some of the best the show has ever had, and was the Doctor Who Douglas Camfield was born to make. There's so many stark shots and action set pieces which have no right to be as good as they are given the budget. It adds an edge to this episode which persists right to the end. Other than the drop in quality after Part 4, my only real criticism would be the use of the Cybermen. In this story, it very much feels like the premise of them being butchered remnants of humans in robotic survival suits is long forgotten. Instead, they're just an invading alien army of the weak. The story doesn't even really do anything with them, and you could exchange them for a purely robot army and it wouldn't make a difference. If anything, a dodgy but powerful electronics company using their monopoly over circuitry to take over the world would have worked better. Overall, The Invasion is Doctor Who action thriller at its finest. A great conspiracy story with some of the best action set pieces in the 60s. It may drop off a little towards the end, and really doesn't use the Cybermen to their full potential, but so many great side characters with memorable performances help it stand out from start to finish. How lucky we are to have most of this story still surviving. The Krotons. Next up in Season 6, we have the first story penned by a certain Robert Holmes. He's a writer synonymous with the very best of Classic Who, and is widely considered to be one of, if not the greatest ever Doctor Who writer. So with all that in mind, just how good is his first story? Not very, unfortunately. The Krotons takes place on an alien planet which is heavily implied to have been through a nuclear war. The story takes place thousands of years after this, however, and the TARDIS crew encounter an underground dwelling people, the Gons, who seem intelligent about some things but oddly ignorant about other subjects. On top of this, they have a strange ritual where the best and brightest of their students are sent to become companions of the Krotons, an elusive race who live in a machine next to the Gon city, and have taught the Gons much of what they know. However, nobody has ever seen a Kroton and come back to tell the tale. On the surface, it sounds like quite a quality Doctor Who plot, a sci-fi premise set in a Cold War-inspired post-apocalypse with a mystery at its heart. However, it doesn't quite work. Let's start with what's good about the story, though. The sci-fi fare is handled relatively well, even if it's nothing special. The Krotons in the first 2 episodes have a very ominous presence. We never see or hear them directly, but their influence is felt all around, even in the actions the side characters take, and in the minds of both the Doctor and Zoe. Of course, the main cast are on fire as usual. Troughton, Hines, and Patrick can make any script entertaining. Where I think this episode really falls short is the characterisation of the guest cast. They all feel very generic and like people we've seen before, not only in contemporary sci-fi, but in Doctor Who itself. This isn't always a major issue, as often side characters aren't the focus if there's a more interesting, broader plot or mystery that captures the viewer's attention. For episodes 1 and 2, this is achieved by the mystery around the Krotons. However, as soon as they're revealed to be immobile-looking robots with silly South African accents who just drone on and on forever with no memorable dialogue, that avenue of entertainment is closed forever. As a result, episodes 3 and 4 fall flat, as there's nothing left that really stands out, and no other question left to answer other than, how does the Doctor defeat them? It feels like the story is dragging itself to the finish line, with a generic young hothead takes over from the sensible old man and nearly ruins everything, the only source of drama, which is limited to say the least. That's all there really is to say about the Krotons. There's some good ideas in there, and the build-up of dread around the Krotons is successful earlier on, but it doesn't stick the landing, and very much feels like a placeholder story, which it may well have been given the scripting issues throughout Season 6. Not a bad Doctor Who story, but not one I'm ever rushing back to. The Seeds of Death. The 5th serial in the season is the perennially underrated Seeds of Death, a story I'm sure you can tell I like, given I named my channel after a misspelling of the main villain from it. Similar to The Invasion, it's quite an action-oriented story, but instead of being a conspiracy story, this one is a thriller, with some excellently prescient sci-fi ideas strewn throughout. The Seeds of Death takes place in the futuristic 21st century, where space travel has all but been forgotten in a world where people can have what they want instantly, through a worldwide instantaneous teleportation system known as TMAT. Given the episode is broadcast in mid-1969, at the height of the space race, mere months before the moon landing, it would have been quite a shocking idea that this is something people would soon tire of. However, fast forward to today, and I think it's quite prescient. There's very little interest in space travel, and while that may not be because of TMAT, I think a similar issue is at play. To quote Daniel Eldred in the episode, "Nobody is interested in space travel anymore. Life was made too easy by TMAT." The themes it plays on in this regard are well sown throughout the story, with a lot of the characters' actions, dialogue, and world building pointing to a society that has become arrogant and complacent due to the ease in which TMAT has allowed them to live. Take the fact that there are no rockets on standby for a scenario of the moon-based relay system not working, or the fact they're so reliant on a system very few people actually understand. It rings true given the sloppy cost-cutting measures and demand for instant results world governments would have towards such a technology, and I think it acts as a great parable for never having all your eggs in one basket with a technology that is believed to be infallible. So the sci-fi concept is excellent, but how does the story itself as a viewing experience actually hold up? It's absolutely brilliant. Michael Ferguson's direction elevates the already solid material into being all-time classic Doctor Who. His camera work is slick and the action is intense all the way from part 1. He's great at building a compounding sense of tension as disaster after disaster befall the characters, especially in parts 2 and 3 when the TARDIS team travel to the moon base in a rocket. The Ice Warriors, who are trying to use TMAT to make Earth unlivable for humans so they can invade, are at their best here. They have an intimidating presence all throughout, and you can feel the genuine fear as to what will happen to the characters every time one is on screen. They rack up quite the kill count in this story, the second most ever on screen in Classic Who, and that's what really makes all the tension pack a punch. This story also has that all-important great roster of side characters. The guest cast portrays them excellently and memorably. Most importantly, they help give texture to the world we've landed in, and help us understand the society. Radner is a no-nonsense administrator tasked with keeping TMAT going no matter what. His determination in the story helps show us how reliant on TMAT the world has become, as he was willing to completely lose face in front of an old friend turned rival, just for a chance of resolving the situation. Miss Kelly is the genius technical officer, who is one of the few people who actually understand TMAT. She helps show just how privileged a position anybody with knowledge of TMAT is, as she's able to directly challenge and override Radner's authority to do what she thinks is best, and doesn't face any repercussions for it, as she's irreplaceable. Eldrad is the bitter old man whose life work has been in rockets, which are now seen as completely outdated, leaving him in a world that he feels he no longer has a part left to play. Quite the opposite of the plight of a rocket scientist in 1969. As usual, the Doctor, Zoe and Jamie are on form. We do miss a bit of Troughton as he has an episode knocked out so he could go on holiday, but I feel we can see the Jamie and Zoe partnership really coming into its own here. I'd argue this is Zoe's best episode, as her technical expertise and her willingness to adventure so she can live fully are well utilised throughout, and Jamie gets plenty of action moments himself. To conclude, The Seeds of Death is an underrated classic in Doctor Who history. It's not an episode that will astound or stagger you, but what it's trying to do, it does almost flawlessly. From excellent world building to thrilling action, this is a Doctor Who episode that is aged like fine wine and doesn't seem remotely outdated to this day. Quite an achievement for a bit of TV nearly 55 years old. The Space Pirates. No, I'm not watching or talking about the Space Pirates again. If you want to know my thoughts on that, go watch my reappraisal video from a few years ago. The War Games. At last we have the epic finale to the Troughton era, a 10-episode story on a massive scale which also features the first appearance of the Time Lords. I think the most amazing fact is that Terrance Dicks and Malcolm Hulke wrote this story in only a few weeks, as yet another script in Season 6 had fallen through, and the finale had to make up for the shortfall. Is it possible to write 10 passable episodes of Doctor Who in only a few weeks? Well, not only did the writing duo manage that, they produced 10 of the best Doctor Who episodes ever. The War Games opens with the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe landing in No Man's Land in what is seemingly the First World War. However, as the TARDIS crew are captured and put on trial for spying, it is clear that not all is as it should be. The way the first few episodes build up the mystery is brilliant Doctor Who. The sense of intrigue and helplessness is palpable as the characters struggle to work out where they are. It starts with people discussing things they can't remember until during the trial, the presiding judge, General Smythe, clearly has a mental hold over the other judges and members of the HQ in a way that is clearly beyond contemporary human technology. After the crew escape with a British captain and a volunteer nurse, they drive as far away from the HQ as possible. While under fire, they pass through a strange mist. On the other side is a completely different climate, unspoiled by modern warfare. Soon after arriving, the episode ends on a cliffhanger as the group are attacked by a Roman legion. Needless to say, but this is a superb cliffhanger. The audience has been let in on the fact that something isn't quite right, but they have had no reason to believe they're not really in 1917. but this cliffhanger leaves the audience with so many questions and so much to ponder. It's an almost breathtaking experience as David Maloney excellently captures the sense of confusion and chaos with such a vigorous intensity. It's just a shame the way the Romans are portrayed as fighting is almost comical in its levels of historical inaccuracy, but it certainly works as an in-universe scene. The story then unfolds on a grand scale as the Doctor and co explore the various different war zones present all over the planet, before eventually finding the centre, where the whole operation is controlled from by a set of ruthless aliens combing through the humans in order to create a conquering army. As mentioned, the sense of scale is well cultivated, and there are so many places explored with a great number of different nationalities portrayed. The core concept is just so good and was perfectly wrapped up in mystery early on to gain the audience's interest, and has a hell of a payoff when all is revealed, and the Doctor and the various kidnapped humans have to fight for their freedom. The story and its themes are very Hulkian. Distrust of military elite is a recurring hallmark of his stories. Think the Silurians or Frontier in Space. I think he tells a very interesting story which fits in with a lot of the beliefs that he had. The military elite in the war games are all colleagues with each other, who callously use the bravery and even the lives of groups of soldiers who think they're fighting for their country, when actually it's just said military elites trying to get one up on each other. This has shades of certain perspectives of the First World War, in which the episode opens. The vast armies of the battlefields are filled with ideas of patriotism and fighting for their country and so on, and all led by aristocrats, who sometimes have more of a personal connection to their enemy commanders than to their troops. The kings of England, Germany and Russia were all cousins after all. Hulk then shows that the way for the troops to escape this hell of pointless war is for the ordinary soldier to put aside their differences with the men of other armies, and embrace their shared experience and struggle under the yoke of callous commanders and fight back for their freedom. Even if this is a perspective you don't quite agree with, I think that the themes certainly give those reading between the lines something interesting to think about, as it perfectly demonstrates the dangers of making war abstract enough that it becomes a game for those in charge. Of course, the war games cannot be reviewed without talking about the first ever appearance of the Time Lords. After the alien commanders are defeated, the Doctor realises he is unable to get all of the remaining humans home, and as a result, for the first time in the show's history, he calls upon his own people, the Time Lords, to sort out the situation, something he is very reluctant to do. The sense of dread as soon as they are brought up is palpable. All the characters in the know show such genuine fear at the mere mention of them. It adds such a sense of intrigue and doom, just as it looked like the story was winding down. It's superb in the way it foreshadows the Time Lords as an all-powerful race, with strict motives that are a bit beyond the comprehension of all others. The Doctor tries desperately to escape, but is eventually caught by the Time Lords and summoned as a witness at the trial of the Warlord who ran the whole War Games scheme. He is eventually sentenced guilty. His planet is permanently locked in a force field so they may never regress against the other species again, and the Warlord himself is literally dematerialised from time, making it as if he had never existed. Despite all the atrocities committed by the Warlord and his people, you can't quite help but be staggered at just how terrifying the sentence is, and are quite frankly left in awe of the power of the Time Lords. That is what's so great about their portrayal here. They are such a grand and mysterious force that strikes both fear and amazement at the same time. This was so important to capture, that showing where the Doctor came from was always going to be a dangerous game, as one of the very attractive traits about the character was the sense of mystery around him, hence the title, Doctor Who? The War Games manages to raise far more questions than answers about the Doctor and his people in the best of ways, leaving the character with a strong sense of mystery, leaving the narrative of the show in a very healthy state. The War Games is one of those very special Doctor Who stories that has such an aura of magic around it, which can't fail to capture me every time. The mystery and scale of the plot are so captivating, they retain the audience's attention for the entire 10-episode runtime. Further to this, David Maloney's direction is as usual superb, and there isn't a single dud among the entire cast of guest actors, all giving memorable performances. I think it's worth emphasising just how well paced this story is, given that the runtime is quite a bit longer than most films. If you have the time, it's easily watchable in one sitting, and in my opinion, the preferable way to view. It was a fitting end to the era, and I think one of the few regeneration episodes for Doctor Who which both manages to make the story suitably epic without going over the top. It's one of the best of all time. Conclusion. Season 6 is in some ways a mixed season. There are some real low moments, with the space pirates being one of the driest affairs in the show's long history, and as much as I love the Dominators, it's difficult to deny that it's a bit of a car crash. But given the huge production issues the show was going through, specifically with scripting, it's shocking just how good of a season it is. Mind Robber, The Invasion, and the War Games are all among some of the most fondly thought of stories in the entire history of the show, and even lesser mentioned stories like The Seeds of Death deserve more love as a great example of slick action TV sci-fi. These boons more than make up for the lesser stories, making this a fitting end for Patrick Troughton's Doctor.